Could the Texas A&M Aggies finish with the number one recruiting class in college football? Let's talk about it next, right here on Locked On Aggies.
You are Locked On Aggies, your daily podcast on the Texas A&M Aggies, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome in. You are locked on to the Texas A&M Aggies. I am Matt Galatzan, and I will be your host. Thanks for making Locked On Aggies your first listen every day. Today, we are going to talk about a variety of topics concerning the Texas A&M Aggies. Number one, can Texas A&M finish with the number one recruiting class in the country? We'll go into whether or not the Aggies are being disrespected around the rest of college football, and then we'll close out with some new news out of the new College Football 26 video game from EA Sports. But first, let's come off the top ropes and hit the A&M recruiting class first. Today, Texas A&M made huge waves again on the recruiting trail, landing a commitment from four-star Carthage linebacker DeQuavius Beck, another four-star in the back pocket for Mike Elko for this recruiting class. They have been absolutely crushing it on the recruiting trail so far. After the commitment of Beck, Texas A&M now has the number 4 recruiting class in the nation, the number 2 class in the SEC behind the Georgia Bulldogs. And if you're in the Georgia Bulldogs conversation, I think you're doing pretty good, and that's what the Aggies are doing right now. Alongside in that linebacker room now with Beck, the Aggies have Storm Miller, another 4-star linebacker out of Strongville, Ohio. They have commitments from 5-star talents like Brandon Arrington and Kristen Givens on that side of the ball. And it really speaks to what Mike Elko has been able to do with this recruiting class thus far. He is cleaning up. He's in the conversation for a lot more guys, which we'll get into here in a minute. But right now, the Aggies are doing everything that they need to do to be in the conversation to finish with the number 1 recruiting class. If you go down the list of commitments, we already mentioned Darrington. We already mentioned Tristan Givens and Beck. They also have 4-star running back KJ Edwards, a big target for the in-state rival Texas Longhorns. You have Aaron Gregory, a 4-star wide receiver out of Douglasville, Georgia. You have a running back, Jonathan Hatton Jr., 4-star. Cornerback, Victor Singleton, 4-star. Jordan Carter, edge, 4-star. Offensive tackle, Samuel Rosenbrow. Offensive tackle, 4-star. Jermaine Kinsler, 4-star defensive lineman. We can go on and on down the list. Madden Williams, wide receiver, 4-star. Helaman Kasuga, Elite 11 finalist, 4-star. You can go down the list with the Aggies, and they are doing everything that is required to compete in the SEC. They are getting players in the right positions. They are getting elite players in the right positions, and they're getting kids with good character, good athletic ability, all the tools, anything you can think of that you might need to compete for that number 1 spot. And if you talk about what's coming on down the line, we already know what Helaman Kasuga can do. He was at the Elite 11 finals last week in LA. I was there, saw him play. For my money, he was the most consistent player there outside of the MVP, Diabell. He did a fantastic job, but they're also in the conversation for a lot of other guys as well. You got 5-star wide receiver Tristan Keys, who's currently committed to LSU. But according to reports from Rivals.com's recruiting team over there, Keys is very much in the conversation with Texas A&M. He's been in College Station a couple times since his commitment to LSU. He said great things about the Aggie program. And then you got another wide receiver, 5-star Booby Feaster out of DeSoto, Texas. He's down to Texas A&M and USC. That's another big one that they're firmly in the conversation for. I fully expect the Aggies to be right there in the conversation, if not land him outright. I would be very shocked if he did not become part of the maroon and white later down the line. They also have the commitment for Aaron Gregory, like I said. And they also have the number 10 player in the country, Jace Matthews, or the number 10 wide receiver in the country, rather, Jace Matthews, who's another solid pickup for them. And they have Madden Williams and Mike Brown already there too. So the receiver is set, but they're not done there either. They're going for 5 stars as well. They're in the conversation for the top-ranked athlete in the nation, Lamar Brown. He is a defensive lineman, offensive lineman. He can play both sides of the ball. They're also in the conversation for a 5-star safety in Braylon Womack. And you go on down the line, Bryce Perry Wright, another defensive lineman. You know, if they can land 3 out of these four out of these, 5 or 6 guys, they'll be in great shape. That is their path to getting to the number one recruiting class in college football. The Texas Longhorns did it last year. The Aggies would love nothing more than to come back and do the same thing in 2026. I think they have every opportunity to do it. I think the key to that conversation is going to be what happens with Lamar Brown, what happens with Tristan Keys, what happens with Boobie Feaster, and what happens with Bryce Perry Wright. Those are 4 guys who are 5-star, or at least in the conversation of being 5 stars, who are very interested in your program, who are buying into what Mike Elko is selling, and who are buying into what this class could become. We've seen Texas A&M finish with a number 1 class before. It was back in 2022. That didn't work out so well. I think that this is going to be a different conversation that we're having here today. If we're sitting here in December on early signing day and Texas A&M is in that position, I think we're having a totally different conversation than we had back in 2022, because I think this is the type of class that is built from the ground up to compete in the SEC and to be an elite team in the SEC. Now, there's also the chance that some of these guys that are committed could change their minds and go elsewhere. And that is something that happens in college football recruiting all the time. That's not necessarily something that I think Aggie fans need to be worried about, though, because here's the real driving force behind all of this. Mike Elko. Mike Elko, yes, he went 8-4 last year. Yes, there was some conversation about should we be bringing in a former defensive coordinator to run this program. For my money, that conversation is completely out the window, and it's not a factor anymore. Mike Elko is the man that should be leading this program. He proved it in year 1, having them a win away from making the SEC championship game in his first year as the head coach. That is something that not a lot of programs can say. That is something that not a lot of head coaches can say. He had them there. Now he's getting them on the track to have one of their best recruiting classes of all time. And if he can finish this thing out, you'll see a year, 2, 3 years from now, Texas A&M is going to be right there in the conversation for college football playoffs, for SEC championships, and all of those things as well. Now, this also brings the conversation up as well. Have the Aggies been a little bit disrespected so far, considering all the returning talent and all of the moves that they have made in the transfer portal so far this season, in this offseason rather? I think maybe that could be a possibility. We're going to talk about that next here on Locked On Aggies. But first, let's take a message from our sponsor real quick. Today is brought to you by Monarch Money. Have you ever wished you've been managing your money felt easier? With Monarch Money, it can. Whether you're growing your savings or planning a big purchase, Monarch Money puts you in the driver's seat. It's like having your own personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money is more than a budgeting app. It's a complete financial command center. You can track all of your accounts, investments, and spending in one place. So in addition to managing your money, you're able to build wealth. I know when I recently started using Monarch Money, I instantly realized I had a ton of subscriptions across streaming platforms, delivery services, and all sorts of other things that I hadn't used in months. Monarch Money helped me solve that issue quickly and save myself hundreds of dollars a month almost instantly. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONCollege at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONCollege for half your first year. Okay, we're back. And now, listen, we have to get into the conversation of whether or not the Texas A&M Aggies have been disrespected so far in these preseason rankings across college football. And if you look on the face on it, I can see from an outside perspective how you might have that opinion. Texas A&M started the season on super hot last year. They had one loss going into the back half of their schedule. Things started to kind of fall apart after the Le'Veon Moss injury. And yes, you're competing for an SEC championship, but you dropped a couple games on the back end of your schedule. And the conversation becomes, okay, same old Aggies. Here we are starting off well. We get our expectations high, and then we drop off, and we fall back into a mediocre team, and we play in a Las Vegas Bowl against USC, and we just don't care at that point. We're kind of out of the conversation by then. I think, and you can take this for what it's worth. I think Texas A&M, being projected outside of the top 10. I think that that's somewhat fair considering all the talent that you have in the Big Ten with an Ohio State, with an Oregon, with a Penn State. You look over in the ACC, you got Clemson, who for my money is going to be in the national title conversation next year. And then you look inside your own conference, and the SEC has an opportunity to be as competitive and deep as it has been in years next season. You have the Texas Longhorns right now up there at the top, with Arch Manning and all those guys coming back, bringing back a national title contending roster. You have the Georgia Bulldogs, who, yes, they lose Carson Beck, but they have Gunnar Stockton, who beat Texas in the SEC championship game and played well in the college football playoff. They bring in a couple of receivers. Noah Thomas from Texas A&M went over there to help them with their receiver issue, and now they've got guys who can catch the ball consistently. You got LSU, who a lot of people feel are going to be competing for a national title. You got this Alabama Crimson Tide, second year under Kalen DeBoer, another really, really good football team with Caden Proctor and all these guys on that side and Ryan Williams. These elite offensive players, and they are going to have one of the best defenses in the SEC. You talk about South Carolina, and they have Lenore Sellers and Nick Harbor and all these guys going down the list. The SEC is going to be as tough as it's ever been in college football. That said, the Texas A&M Aggies should not be left out of this conversation. And here's why. Number one, you have Marcel Reed coming back at quarterback, who last season, for all his ups and downs, you could tell there was a difference when he came into the football game and replaced Connor Wegman. And when he became the full-time starter, this Texas A&M offense was on another level. They were getting their butts kicked by the LSU Tigers. Marcel Reed comes in. He leads them to a win. A lot of it with his legs, not as much with his arm, but you saw against the Florida Gators what he could do with his arm. You saw against the Auburn Tigers what you could do with his arm. And now another year under Colin Klein, absorbing this system, learning it, implementing it. He's going to be a much, much better player in 2025 than he was in 2024. And that is going to be something. I mean, he very well could be the best quarterback the Aggies have had since Johnny Manziel. That might be a little bit lofty, at least since Kellen Mond. He is going to be an elite quarterback for the Texas A&M Aggies, and that's where it starts. Then you look at the running back room. Le'Veon Moss was the number one running back in the SEC last season before his injury. You're getting him back. You're getting back Reuben Owens as well, who was injured for most of last season, but when healthy was an elite running back. You got Amari Daniels back as well. That three-headed monster running back is going to be huge for Texas A&M and for Marcel Reed, for that matter, going forward. Now, you go up front. There is an argument to be made that Texas A&M has the best returning offensive line in the SEC. It starts with Trey Zune at left tackle. Then you have a Walter Camp second-team preseason All-American and Armaj Reed-Adams helping to pave the way there for Texas A&M up front. If they can carve out some lanes for this running game and they can protect Marcel Reed and allow these playmakers that they have, which I'll get to in a second, on the outside, that is really going to make Texas A&M's offense pretty hard to stop. Then we think about the wide receiver core. Last season for Texas A&M, it was a very, very difficult road. You had some playmakers with Noah Thomas, and you had Jabre Barber, and you had Cyrus Allen, but there was never really a group of guys out there that you could count on game after game after game. Ja'Day Walker was another guy that played well at points, and then there was other games where he didn't necessarily play as productively. Whatever the case may be, they addressed the position this offseason. They went out and got the number 2 wide receiver in the transfer portal in Casey Concepcion. You bring in Mario Craver. You got two explosive playmakers on the outside that can really hurt opposing defenses down the field. You also bring in Jonah Wilson from Houston, who's 6'2", 200 pounds. He's going to have 3 years of eligibility left. He can be a key part of this offense as well. Then you talk about the tight end position. You bring in back Theo Melanostrom, who is one of the better tight ends in the SEC. And you're bringing over a Texas Longhorns transfer in Amari Niblack, who never really fit into what the Texas Longhorns were trying to do last season. That said, he did have flashes back when he was at Alabama of being an elite player down the field. He had a couple of flashes at Texas, but never really caught on. I think that Texas A&M is going to be able to find a way to use his athletic ability and get him moving in the open field and make this offense one of the more explosive downfield threats and rushing threats in college football. And that is just on the offensive side of the ball. Now you look over on the defense, and you've made some great acquisitions there as well via the transfer portal. You know, you already have Will Lee coming back. You already have Des Ricks coming back at corner. Now you add Julian Humphrey from Georgia, who's one of the fastest players in college football and one of the more talented corners in the SEC that hasn't really gotten a starting opportunity to shine. Having him back there is going to pay huge dividends. You bring back arguably the best linebacker in the SEC in Torian York. If he's not the best linebacker, he's second best behind Anthony Hill at Texas. He is a Walter Camp preseason first-team All-American as of Tuesday afternoon. He is going to be the leader of this defense. And they also bring in an edge rusher from Georgia, Samuel Mpemba, who is one of the more athletically gifted edge rushers in all of college football. So that's not even talking about Albert Regis returning along the defensive line and all of these other pieces that they have coming back on a defense that was pretty good last year. They struggled in some points against the run and in other areas, but this defense has improved over last season. This offense, I believe, is going to be massively improved on going into next season. And when you look up, and Texas A&M is heading to Austin next season for that showdown with Texas in the Lone Star Showdown, then you're going to start having a conversation again, I think, this year of if Texas A&M can win this game, they could be in a position to compete for an SEC championship. And I don't think they're going to be 8-3 at that point. I think that they're probably going to be closer to 9-2, 10-1. It depends on the schedule. You got to go to LSU this year. You got to go to Notre Dame this year. How are they going to handle these different roadblocks that are on their schedule? That's a perfectly rational conversation and one that we're going to have later on this summer as we start to get into more team previews. But right now, as the Aggies are built, they are a team that I think should be getting a little bit more publicity in terms of whether or not they can compete for an SEC title, because there's not a lot of teams that return as much talent, and there's certainly not a lot of teams who have acquired as much talent to add on top of that to, an already talented roster. And they had as good of an offseason as almost anybody in the country in terms of transfer portal acquisitions, and the recruiting class was ranked, fairly high as well in 2025. This is a team that people need to be on the lookout for. Now, we're going to kind of change gears a little bit. We're going to go into some video game talk, which I know is always interesting to people. College Football 26 is something that a lot of people are looking forward to these days. Texas A&M has some very interesting rankings in there, and we're going to talk about that next here on Locked On Aggies. Okay, so let's talk about it. Texas A&M is going to be a feature team in College Football 26 from EA Sports next season. They, like I said in the last segment, return a ton of talent, and that's great for them. They may not be getting the publicity in the media, but it seems like College Football 26 is kind of giving them their shine, and you love to see that, right? So we're going to kind of go down the list here and see which players for Texas A&M are kind of standing out above the rest. Right now, the highest rated player for the Aggies is Armaj Reed Adams, the second team Walter Camp preseason All-American that I mentioned a minute ago. He is a 93 overall. The next two Aggies that I have on the list are Torian York, again, first team preseason Walter Camp All-American. He's a 90 overall. And wide receiver Kevin Concepcion is also a 90 overall. And then you go to the running back room. You talk about Le'Veon Moss, 89 overall. Amari Daniels, 88 overall. Ruben Owens, 87 overall. You go back to the offensive line. You got Trey Zune at 88 overall. Along the defensive line, Cassius Howell, who's another key returner for Texas A&M, who I didn't even mention in the last segment, is one of the best edge rushers in the SEC. He's an 86 overall. You got Tyler Onyindem. Apologies for the pronunciation there. Defensive end, 88 overall. So there's a lot of players on this Aggies roster that are set to shine in the video game coming up. And as a result of that, Texas A&M is one of the higher ranked teams in the game overall. They're ranked, I believe, number 8 overall in the game. An 88 overall ranking in terms of, the highest ranking you could possibly get is a 99. There's no one even close to that. But Texas A&M sits with an 88 overall, an 87 overall offense, an 84 overall defense. They're going to be a really, really fun team to play with. They in last year's game, they had an 89 overall offense, and it drops a little bit. I think that you're going to see as they make updates in that game that is going to increase. And if you look at the top 25 offenses in the whole game, A&M's right there in the conversation. Texas has the number 1 ranked offense at 91 overall, followed by Penn State, Ohio State, and Arizona State. They're all tied there at 91 overall. Then you have a few teams at 89 overall with Clemson, LSU, Alabama, Notre Dame, Florida, Miami, Indiana, and Texas A&M. They're all right there. Now, if we get to a point in the season and Texas A&M is really turning on the Jets offensively, then you're probably going to see that ranking rise a little bit. Also, Marcel Reed is going to be a very, very fun guy to play with in that game. I don't know if anybody remembers going back to NCAA 2006 or whatever the case may be back in the day, but when you had Vince Young, a guy that could run and throw the ball or a Pat White for West Virginia, a guy that could run and throw the ball, Marcel Reed is going to have some very similar rankings in there. So that's something to look forward to as well. Then you look over on the defensive side of the ball, and I already mentioned all the player overalls, but if you look at the top 25 defenses, you have Alabama ranked number 1 overall at 96, the Texas Longhorns and Penn State Nittany Lions at 94. Then you have Georgia, Ohio State, Michigan, Oregon, LSU, and Texas Tech all there at 92. Then you have Clemson, Notre Dame, and A&M there rounding out the top 12 at a 90 overall. So very balanced on both sides of the ball for Texas A&M there. They also have one of the most electric players in the entire game as well. Julian Humphrey, the corner that I mentioned in the last segment, he is one of the fastest players in the entire game, 98 overall speed. That's something to really pay attention to as well. Now, if you get into the kind of controversial conversation about this whole thing, that's when you get to the difficulty, the places that are most difficult to play in college football, which we'll get into here now. And that's kind of where the conversation gets a little bit weird if you're a Texas A&M fan, because historically, and I think you can ask pretty much anybody around the country, including, the Missouri Tigers, who talked a little bit of trash coming into the Texas A&M game last year, Notre Dame, any team that came into Kyle Field last year, or for that matter, over the last few years, it is widely considered a top 5 place to play in terms of difficulty in the entire country. I know that I have spent some time there covering the Aggies for Texas A&M Aggies on SI, and it is one of the more surreal experiences in college football. It gets loud, it gets rowdy. The noise is a real factor on opposing offenses, and it can cause a lot of problems. Yet, for some reason, Texas A&M finds himself ranked number 11 in these rankings, which I just frankly do not understand. You can make the argument that some of these teams ahead of them should be there. For example, Michigan, it's the biggest stadium in football in the world, the most fans in the stands in the world. So I'm okay putting that up there. Autzen Stadium is ranked number 9 for Oregon. The first one that doesn't really make sense to me is Oklahoma there at number 8. I get that's a tough place to play, but I don't have it above Kyle Field by any means. The Swamp at Florida, you could make that argument. Clemson, the fake Death Valley, for what I like to say, because I believe LSU is the real Death Valley. That's there at number 6. Bryant-Denny Stadium, Alabama, number 5. Georgia Sanford Stadium, number 4. Ohio Stadium at Ohio State, number 3. Beaver Stadium at Penn State, number 2. And Tiger Stadium, undisputed number 1 in my book. Probably I've been to a lot of these stadiums. LSU is the loudest place I've ever been. That's no shade to Texas A&M whatsoever, but I think they should be, if you're redoing these rankings, and I believe these rankings will get redone at some point as they update the game throughout the year, Texas A&M is going to find themselves sitting somewhere in that top 5 when it really starts to matter. Because Kyle Field, for whatever anybody else wants to say, is one of the most iconic and game day experiences and most iconic stadiums. It gets so loud. The stadium, as we all know, sways back and forth. It is an elite college football experience, and it certainly deserves to be ranked higher. But we're going to call it there. This is the inaugural episode for me here on Locked On Aggies, and I'm very excited to bring some more coverage to you guys throughout the rest of the summer and going into next football season. Thank you so much for making this your first listen of the day. And for your second listen, please go check out the Portal Show. Brian Smith has the latest rumors, portal entries, and signings. Be the most informed fan on the rapid changes in college football, on the college football landscape. Find the Portal on YouTube and wherever you listen to your podcasts on the Locked On Network. There will be plenty more Texas A&M news coming on tomorrow's show. And who knows, there's always something exciting happening in Aggie land. Fortunately, we've got you covered right here on Locked On Aggies. But that's going to do it for me on today's show. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel, and follow me over on Twitter at Matt Galatzan, and follow us on Texas A&M Aggies on SI as well for all the latest news when it comes to Texas A&M Aggie sports. We cover everything from football to basketball to baseball, softball. We got you covered, so go check us out there, and we will see you next time.